Well, good morning, and I think we will get going here at about 9:03. We still have some more people joining us, but they'll catch up, and we do want to get going. We really appreciate everybody joining us this morning. We know you have busy schedules. We've kind of compressed our what used to be in-person regional housing forums into a Zoom format. We're going to get back to in-person convening, I think, the next round of forums. But we've compressed this to just a morning, 9 to noon. Normally they would be most of the day, or at least until 2 or 3 p.m. But we'll get back to that eventually. I just want to start out by welcoming you to the Northeast Minnesota Regional Housing Forum. And we're glad you could join us for this really timely affordable housing discussion. I'm Warren Hansen, president of Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, and Deputy Commissioner Rachel Robinson from Minnesota Housing will also speak with us in just a couple of minutes. First, I want to mention that this forum is co-hosted by Minnesota Housing, Department of Iron Range Resources and Rehabilitation, or IRRR, American Indian Housing Organization, or ACO, Cook County HRA, and Minnesota Housing Partnership, as well as Greater Minnesota Housing Fund. So thanks to everybody who helped make this forum a great learning experience for all of us. We have people here today from every sector who are registered, from employers to developers to government and community organizations, all indicating a really broad interest in advancing affordable housing in the cities and the counties of the Northeast region. When you registered, we asked you what types of organizations and sectors you represent. So since we're not in the room together, we can see each other on screen, but we've kind of broken it out by sector here in terms of who registered. And we have a large number of local and state government reps, about 40%, which is a good sign for the region in terms of local government being very interested and involved in affordable housing. About a third of us are from various community groups and employers. And we have a very good number, almost an equal number of housing development organizations and human service organizations that are involved or concerned with housing issues. And then we have several funders and banks and CDFIs. So a good cross-sector representation of housing champions and people interested in housing. Additionally, during your registration, we did ask what housing issues you're most interested in or concerned about. And so on the screen, you just see a list. You've probably seen a list like this before. It kind of confirms what I think we all know. But in terms of the top 10 things that people are interested in the Northeast region related to affordable housing, top of the list, multifamily and single family housing production. And then going down the list, we have culturally specific housing and workforce housing needs, supportive housing for those at risk of homelessness, and several others that you can see on the screen there. So as you know, and the big news really of the day is that the 2023 legislative session was dramatically and historically successful, resulting in the passage of a $1.3 billion with a B housing budget, plus additional funding for housing via Department of Human Services, taxes, Department of Corrections even, and several regulatory policy advances that bring the total for housing out of this legislative session to $2 billion, which will all help production and preservation over the next several years and better protect tenants. And I think it's useful and important to underscore how this historic housing budget is really the result of decades of housing advocacy by hundreds and hundreds of advocates and housing allies from every corner of the state, including employers and local government leaders and our development partners and just people really concerned with housing in general. So this year, the resulting state housing budget is 10 times the historical norm for housing. So we've never seen that before in our lifetime, and hopefully we'll be able to sustain that over time. So much has been accomplished, and we will hear more about this from Deputy Commissioner Rachel Robinson and Assistant Commissioner Ryan Bob Trog very shortly. Let me just start out briefly by giving you a quick summary of today's agenda. We'll hear 3 presentations discussing first, lessons learned from a recent tribal housing development application to Minnesota Housing from ACO. And we'll also hear about how Sawtooth Flats in Grand Marais was developed, and a little bit about how NIMBYism was a factor that was addressed successfully. And lastly, we'll hear an overview of grant opportunities and development partnerships with Iron Range Resources in Rehabilitation. And then we will also hear the housing policy update, the very exciting policy update on what happened at the legislature this session, and what that means for affordable housing over the next few years. We'll hear from Minnesota Housing on that. And then we'll have a couple of presentations on new funding resources and housing programs at Greater Minnesota Housing Fund and Minnesota Housing Partnership. And just a note that Minnesota Housing will have a very in-depth breakout session on their single family and multifamily programs as part of our agenda today. And that will be part of the breakout sessions. So I know that they will also address what the implications are for the new state funding resources that are going to be available. And then finally, we'll have, we hope, 2 breakout sessions for you to talk with funders, and you'll be able to pick which session or which Zoom room you go to. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Rachel Robinson. We're thrilled to have Deputy Commissioner Rachel Robinson from Minnesota Housing with us today. Deputy Commissioner Robinson and Commissioner Ho are really our state's leads on affordable housing at the Capitol, along with their legislative staff. And really a lot was accomplished this session, in part because of the bipartisan support for affordable housing that the agency has been so successful at maintaining over these many decades. So Rachel Robinson, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Warren. I really appreciate the welcome and all of the background on where we are right now, and the conversation we're having today is just so relevant given what we've accomplished at the Capitol. So I'm Rachel Robinson. I am the Deputy Commissioner at Minnesota Housing. So I work really closely with Commissioner Jennifer Ho, and we run an agency that is already very large and sophisticated with multiple RFP deadlines, and we're coming into a year where things are going to look even bigger and even more incredible. So I do want to thank, it's really great to see all of the co-hosts and to see so many familiar faces who we work with on the ground across Northeast Minnesota. So this is a year we started in 2023, getting used to the idea of talking about 1 billion with a B. And here we are. We ended our bill. The legislature passed our bill and the governor signed it before the session was even over. So record time, and that is so much due in part to all of your work, everyone who talked across your communities, who, the local level, the grassroots level, talking to those at the Capitol about the needs around all housing and affordable housing in Minnesota. That's what got this done. And the number is bigger than 1 billion. So we just have to start talking about 1-point-something billion, and it's across the spectrum. I know, looking at that slide of what you're all interested in, the spectrum of housing is covered by this bill. We have, production and preservation. We have single family and rental housing. So there is just so much goodness in this bill, and we're so excited to work with all of you to make it happen. I will note that, in this huge investment year, we are being thoughtful, we are being organized and planful in how we put all these resources to work. It takes time just to read the list because there are so many line items, and those that are in existing programs. So we already run the huge multifamily and single family consolidated request for proposal process. If you're familiar with it, it's already a really significant process to get applications into the agency and fund development projects across the state. And a lot of these resources will flow into that RFP cycle. And so they'll be put to work with applications that are already coming in over the next few years in future cycles as well, so you have time to prepare. For those that are new, and we got some very, very new, as well as some sort of new adjacent programs in the budget, nothing is really small by the scale of state government. I mean, I think the smallest is 1 million, and that's saying a lot. But all of these resources from 1 million to 100 million in the line item, we are already doing the planning, and we are putting our teams to work to figure out what the infrastructure will look like to pull those programs together over the next couple of years. So it's going to be a very exciting time, and I appreciate that all of you are part of that. We're all working in the same labor market. We're all working in these times where we've seen costs really escalate across the board, from the cost of our staffing to the cost of construction, materials, insurance, taxes. We're seeing the pressures everywhere in our field. And that, it could risk some of our capacity, and we're all really sensitive to that and want to make sure that, as always, Minnesota Housing is here as your problem-solving partner. We are with you. We work with the development projects, with the nonprofits on the ground to figure out what's working, and that's a big part of the conversation today. I know my colleagues, Assistant Commissioner Ryan Bobtrog, I see Alyssa, Amanda Welliver, a number of other colleagues who will join sessions to talk about Minnesota Housing's budget and resources going forward, as well as to get into the breakout sessions and really understand what you're experiencing on the ground. So again, exciting times. We're really listening because we're going through strategic planning at the same time that we're budgeting for these next couple of years, figuring out how we're going to hire up the teams we're going to need to run new programs. And we can't do it without you. We don't build anything. So it is you who gets out there and gets the shovels in the ground and the hammers, and we really need you to solve our state's housing crisis and get us to another place with this incredible investment that the legislature and the governor have made. So those are my quick remarks, and I'm happy to hand it back to Warren and the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund team. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks, Commissioner Robinson. And we're all looking forward to working with the agency, as it has, I think, 15, 16 new programs and historic amounts of resources to mobilize. So we're all partners in this great new opportunity. Next, we're really honored to have Ida Rukavina, IRRR Commissioner, with us today. Governor Walz appointed Ida Rukavina to lead the IRRR in December of 2022. And Ida previously served as the executive director of the Range Association of Municipalities and Schools, or RAMS, and has worked extensively with state and local governments and labor. So welcome, Ida. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Warren. Hi, everybody. I'm very excited to be here today as the commissioner of the Iron Range Resources. One of the areas that we are committed to and that I'm committed to is housing. A subject that obviously everyone here today is keenly aware of. And as an agency that's dedicated to economic development and diversification of the Iron Range area, we can tell you that housing definitely is economic development. We plan on building housing capacity in northeastern Minnesota. The regional housing shortage is a critical economic issue. Supply and choice of inventory are currently low and demand is high. And this shortage, we know, is not unique to our region, but it is occurring throughout the state of Minnesota. However, each region and each area and town has different needs. So the need for additional and more choices of housing impacts employers, employees, municipalities, families, school districts, seniors, and new and existing residents. Housing surveys that we've been a part of show, and regional leaders and businesses who've taken part in that in our service area have indicated that there is a lack of housing, and it is impacting the employer's ability to attract and retain workers. Employers report that they could hire more people if there was better housing options available. Employees themselves have indicated that that the lack of housing is impacting where they work, and that the lack of available and the lack of affordable rental units and the housing is too expensive. Communities and municipalities have reported that there's a lack of housing and variety available in their own communities. And we have found that really all types of housing are needed. It's single family homes, it's apartments and rental units, it's affordable workforce housing, market rate housing, and senior housing. And so our agency plans to be a part of the housing shortage solution with a multifaceted approach. Our agency staff will engage regional public and private partners, including area employers and local governments, to work towards solutions. The agency will be providing funding to support new housing development and rehabilitation of existing housing inventory. Many of you know that our agency has funded some housing through infrastructure development, through helping through the infrastructure, the streets and water getting to those developments, but we plan on doing more. We will also explore state and federal resources to complement our localized strategy and investment. And I have to say, on a state level, Governor Walz really came through. He understands that housing shortages must be addressed. He proposed a budget that really impacted this, and wanting to make permanent funding available for increased affordable housing. And as you can see, and you'll hear from more, those efforts paid off. The Minnesota legislative session really came through with a lot of additional funding that we are excited to work with and hope to bring to Northern Minnesota. So our agency is really looking forward to working with the communities that we work with in Northern Minnesota to respond to your specific needs, to work with you. And we know that these actions that our region takes to help solve will impact our communities and schools and economic health of Northeastern Minnesota in a positive way. So I really want to thank you for having me here today. Thank you for all working together, because it will take all of us working together to fix this problem. I also want to thank the agency staff that's been working so long and hard, many of them for years prior to me being here. I know that Danae Baudette, Chris Ismail, and Whitney Ridlon are all on. Many of them have been working with the communities, and I think we'll hear from Whitney maybe later on today. So excited to hear her presentation. And again, just thank you all for being here today. We look forward to working with you all. Thanks.
Thanks, Ida, and thanks for everything that the IRRR has been doing over the decades on infrastructure and clearance of properties to make way for affordable housing. We're intrigued with what might be added to the mix as you think about strategies for the future. We'll now move on to our panel presentations, kind of the core of the whole forum today. We have three people here who are going to be talking about projects and initiatives, recent projects and initiatives. What we would like to just remind you of is keep yourself on mute, but feel free to use the chat to kind of throw some questions out. But we will hold questions till the very end, until after all three are done speaking. And then we'll monitor these chat questions and try to weave them in a little bit. So topic number one, Leanne Littlewolf. I'm going to give you the overview here of all three. Leanne Littlewolf, Co-Executive Director of ACO, or American Indian Community Housing Organization in Duluth, will speak about their Morgan Park development application to Minnesota Housing and some lessons learned as they reapply and got feedback on that application, something that's useful, I think, for everybody to hear, because it often takes a couple of rounds to get through the RFP process. Topic number 2 is going to be from Jason Hale, the Executive Director of Cook County HRA, who will discuss the Grand Marais project, Sawtooth Flats, which was developed by the Cook County HRA. And I believe that project had a bit of a NIMBYism factor, and so we'll hear about how that was overcome. And then lastly, we will hear, as Ida mentioned, from Whitley Ridland, who is actually is the community development representative from IRRR, and will speak on Iron Range Resources and Rehabilitation's grant programs and other opportunities for working with IRRR. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leanne, and let's all welcome Leanne Littlewolf from ACO.
Hey, Ani, good morning. Leanne Littlewolf, Jaginashimowen, Nindijnakas, and Indisogijik, Indigo, Inga Nindude, Megazaga Squaj, Mekag, Unjiba. And I'm the Executive Director at ACO, the American Indian Community Housing Organization. My English name is Leanne Littlewolf. My traditional name is Everyday. I belong to the Wolf Clan, and I come from Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe. I'm a tribal citizen there. So ACO in 2020 partnered with a national developer to develop an affordable housing, multifamily housing. And we had an application that we initiated and we went through at the local level. We needed support to be able to apply, and our application was we couldn't get the support in time through our city council. So we at that time asked questions about what we needed to do the next round. And the information that we received is that we needed to communicate about our project. We needed to really have a lot of conversations ahead of time about what we were doing. And so we learned a lot from that first time in 2020. So 2021, ACO took time to look for a new site because we lost our site. And we had a new developer partner, another national developer. And then we had a technical assistance partner who works specifically in tribal housing, supportive housing, Simone. So we worked with our partners in 2021, one trying to find a location that would accommodate 40 to 60 units, but also have room for green space. So in our design, we had a high priority on, we do a lot of food sovereignty work through our organization. So we wanted the new development to have access to garden space, outdoor space, and cultural space. And right now we operate a permanent supportive housing project called Gamaji Mino Bama Diziman in Duluth, and it's 29 units, and we have efficiencies, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. It was developed, it opened in 2012, but we had bought the building in 2007, so it took 5 years to develop it. And Gamaji is really well known for our creative placemaking because we have built-in community space. It's the historic YWCA, so we have a gym, we have a cultural center, we have a urban rooftop that we use for growing traditional plants, herbs, and vegetables, and then we incorporate arts and traditional culture all the way throughout our programming. So the reason why we wanted to do affordable housing development is that we have community members that they've been in permanent supportive housing for a number of years, but they're ready to transition out into like not fully market rate. They still can benefit from community, but they just need a safe environment. So we wanted to develop an affordable housing development that would have those elements. So in 2022, we located a 3-acre location, and it had a building on it already, and it was in Morgan Park. And we started with communication to our partners. And so the city staff, city leadership, the mayor, city council, saying that we had located this property. We received feedback right away that we should really engage with the community. And so there's a very active community club in Morgan Park. We reached out to them and they agreed to meet with us. And then they had a lot of questions about this development. And it's like very early stages. Like we didn't have an architect engaged. We didn't have, it was just, we had a purchase agreement on the property. So they encouraged us right away to set up a community meeting with the neighborhood. And so within a week and a half, we had a meeting set, and we probably had about 100 people show up to that meeting. It was, and I just want to say that we are a culturally specific organization. We focus on Indigenous approach to everything that we do. So when we planned this meeting, we did that in an Indigenous way, and we had, we opened with a traditional honor song. We had an elder come and talk about the history of Morgan Park, West Duluth, and Duluth. And then we had a presentation on what we were proposing to do with this housing development. And in that community meeting, we were immediately, I would say, confronted with some very vocal questions about like, why were we coming to Morgan Park? Did we think it was smart to come to Morgan Park? That Morgan Park had a lot of issues with infrastructure. And there was like a little bit of, I would say like, there was a couple of community members that were very, just very vocal and just kind of interjected. And so we hadn't finished presenting. So it became a conversation. So we ended up having this conversation about that we were there to learn and to hear what some of the challenges were in the community and to really take that to heart. And then to answer about where we were at and just be really, very truthful. And then some of the questions or some of the, I would say like maybe some of the negative questions that came in, the community members started to answer for each other. So there was a question about, will this have an impact on our schools? Meaning like kind of like a negative impact. And then there was a person there who said, well, I'm a teacher and we have low enrollment, so this actually will help us. And then they had questions about impact on the street. And then this Morgan Park used to have the steel, US Steel was there. So a resident said, you know, we used to have 1,000 cars come in here, so I don't think 60 cars is going to be that big of a difference. And so they started to kind of think through the project and get engaged, and then also learn about ACO and get excited about the work that we did. And by the time we left that meeting, they were very excited about the possibility of this project. I think the other thing that we did is we did talk with media quite a bit. We were really transparent that we were really serious about doing this development, and the media really gave us a lot of attention for it. That also helped inform that neighborhood, but also the wider community that we were doing this development. And then we had an architect design meeting that was in community to take in design ideas for the architectural plan, which we did incorporate. And a lot of what the community voiced, we also had as a priority. So they had an emphasis on green space, so did we. They had an emphasis on safety, so did we. So we started talking about how we had those shared interests and what that meant to each of us and how we envisioned putting that in this project. So I would say like the lesson that I learned from this project as an emerging developer, like I have never done a housing development before. I was lucky enough to be a part of a team that had done developments before, and I learned from them. But I really learned through this whole process the importance of community engagement and being really transparent about what you're trying to do and trying to build like genuine relationships and genuine partnerships. We did that in the neighborhood itself with the neighborhood. We also did that with our city leadership from the staff. The staff like really stepped up and helped us answer questions that went back to the neighborhood, but then also helped us strengthen our application. And I will say that the questions that the community gave us could have been perceived as negative. What those questions actually did is they helped us strengthen our application. They made us think through some really serious, like, is there adequate infrastructure? How will we address safety? So it was actually like, it was just an incredible experience to know that when you hear that and you can listen to it, you can actually strengthen your project. And then I would say all of the partnerships really matter. And if you're an emerging developer like myself, it's really important to have those conversations with like Greater Minnesota Housing Finance, MHFA. We invited people to have conversations and they were totally open to do that. We had many meetings to talk about the project. And we got a lot of feedback and we incorporated that into our work. I'm just gonna close, we went through our application. We didn't score high enough to be successful to be awarded the low income tax credits. And then it made our national developer pause on work in our area. So at this time, we're not in the process of doing that. They didn't extend the purchase agreement. We lost the property. But I'll say that as an organization and as the developers, I think we learned a lot about the prep work that you need to do before you go into these developments and the need for really solid partnerships. So I thank you for taking time to listen and happy to answer questions later. You wish.
Wow, thank you, Leanne. What a saga and what an experience in terms of learning. I do have one question. What are you going to do in the next round, given that your partner left the equation there? Are you
Sure.
independent now or a new partner?
Sure. Right now, ACO, we just had a transition in leadership as well. So we had 2 co-executive directors last year. And that, I came on last year as a co-executive director to help to really focus on the development projects that we have in process. And so then in January, I became the executive director. And so right now it's also like assessing your organizational capacity. And so like right now, we're really focused on making sure that this is a smooth transition for our leadership. And then that we have a couple other developments that are really high priority. So we're renovating a shelter, our Dabanuagan emergency shelter. So that's our highest priority right now. So that's the focus. So I don't think we're going to come into a round this year, and we would have to find another development partner, and we would have to have like a really thoughtful plan on how we were going to proceed. The sad part is that we need affordable housing, and I think that culturally specific housing models really need to be supported and have a chance to really operate and to kind of show the benefits of why it makes a difference. And I think we're doing that at Gamaji, but I know that we need more housing like that.
Well, thanks again, Leanne, and
Yep.
really a wonderful and challenging project story. And just underscoring a couple of things you said, how useful and important it is to engage with the community and how those difficult conversations can really help shape or reshape and improve the project. And then just really underscoring or emphasizing that open invitation to work with Minnesota Housing Finance Agency in those various early stages, so that you get that guidance from the agency as well. So thanks again. So after Leanne, we are going to now move to Jason Hale. Thanks for joining us, Jason. And Jason will talk about how a beautiful 51-unit development project called Sawtooth Flats was developed in Grand Marais. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you for having me, Warren. Hello, everybody. First, I'll say it's great to see so many colleagues and friends here. I forget it's a big shore and a big part of the state, but it's also kind of a small world. So thanks for taking the time on a Monday. I hope you're waking up with coffee. I am. So I'm gonna start. Actually, I think I have some slides here to go through, and I think Jer is gonna throw those up on this. There we go. Perfect. So to start with, I think I'm the only person on the panels here in the group that is talking from the local government perspective. Thus, the title of my terrifying first slide, I guess. But actually, if you can go to the next one, Jer. I'm talking today in my role as the Cook County HRA Executive Director. I'm not going to read our mission statement, but if you're curious, we're about a year, just a little over a year and a half old. I've been with the HRA for just over a year, and our website is cookcountyhra.org if you want to peruse what we're up to. So just quick, the boring stuff. Who am I? To give ethos, Aristotle calls it. I've been working in real estate for 12, 13 years, in real estate appraisal, financing, mortgage lending. Most recently, I've had the pleasure of working for city, county, and HRA and an EDA. So all of the acronyms and local municipal government who works on such things. So I'll let you go to the next one. my housing experience here, I'll be more specific. I've had the ability to work on a number of different housing projects in the Duluth area and now in Cook County. Been able to work on some creating some programs, trying some new creative things, some wins, some losses. Right now, like I said, I'm the first executive director of the Cook County HRA, which basically is like starting a small business just with more rules and red tape, if you will. But it's been a really good learning experience for the community and for myself. And then finally, I just say my own kind of a side anecdote, personal housing voyage or saga is my wife and I just sold our 8th house in Lutzen. We've been married for a little over 10 years. So we're very good at moving, unfortunately. And we've been rehabbing, I think we've rehabbed 7 of those. So I'm in the middle of my 7th right now, rehabbing it. So by the way, I don't recommend that as like counseling for marriage advice. Don't do 8 houses in 10 years unless you really like swatches and Home Depot. But my wife's a therapist, so that helps. So this is the game plan. And just to caveat to what Warren said, the project I'm going to be talking about today, Sawtooth Flats, actually, and you'll see it later, it's actually, the name just changed after I sent my the stuff to Greater Minnesota Housing Fund. It is Switchback Village. Anyway, it is not developed, it's not complete yet. We're through all the pre-development and pre-approval processes. Now they just have to build it. So we're very excited. It took a year to get to this space, and I'll show you what it's going to be looking like in a minute here. But the game plan is, I'm going to talk quickly about what the problem is. We're going to talk about development and the process through this case study, which includes the role of local government, and then wrapping up just quickly talking about NIMBYism, as Warren said. Okay, disclaimer, this is breaking the rules of slideshows, so I'm not going to read all of this. My business class professor would be like, you can't have this much text. I'm not going to read all of it. Suffice it to say, development's complicated. So if any point in my presentation, it feels like, oh, that sounds like it was a pretty linear, easy project. It's not, it never is. It's fraught with terrors and change orders and all sorts of problems. But the point is, I'm only going to be really scratching the surface here about development. My intent here is really to talk about, through the case study, basically the process and laying the groundwork for development and how that applied to this particular process, or this particular project rather. Okay, so what's the problem? We know what the problem is. We're all here because the problem is there's not enough housing, right? I think that's been well established. I've been to enough housing meetings where we talk about the problem. We know what the problem is. The question is, how do we fix it? So these are the questions that are sort of begged by the statement. We need more housing. Great. Okay. How much? Says who? What kind of housing do you need exactly? Where can it go? Which is not always the same as where it should go. Who's going to build it? That's a big question right now. And then finally, what about the math? And by math, I mean the funding of it. I mean, if you can't answer that, none of the other things really matter. So this is the housing project that I was talking about, Switchback Village. This is what it's going to look like. It's a future 51-unit mixed income apartment project in Grand Marais, just on the north side of town, right before you hit the Gunflint Trail to get to the real deep woods. And Grand Marais is already the woods, but this is like, if you want to get lost, then you keep going. There is a second phase as an option. So it's built into the development agreement. Again, right now, the last year has been getting the capital stack together, the funding resources, building consensus, doing educating, working with local government, getting the site, finding the developer, and then having all of the agreements and the sources agreed to and signed. So now we're like, great, the public process part is done. They just have to build it. So that's the easy part. Anyway, so the first question, I'm going to go, like I said, I'm going to go through each of these. How much and says who? Well, Joe Schmo down the street says, we need more housing. By the way, I have yet to hear somebody say, no, we're good. I haven't heard somebody say, I don't think we need any more in our community. We don't want any more of that housing stuff. We know that we need it. Quantifying it is difficult, which is why a lot of people ask, what about housing study? I recommend it. If a lot of people say, well, we don't need that. We already know what the problem is. Right, you do. And in your community, you're probably convinced, we know we need it, and this is the kind we want. What's really helpful, though, is when you have a document from an expert third party who that's what they do, is they quantify the need. And often, if it's a good study, they'll tell you what kinds they think are going to be in most demand. Study is not a silver bullet, but it's a tool. Your community or whoever you're, and again, this is all from a municipal perspective. I'm talking as a local government employee, right? But I can take a housing study then and say, hey, I didn't make it up. Look at this other person found that we need housing too. In fact, we need this many units by this date. You can hand developers, and then they can hand that to their bank. So for Switchback Village, I've had the bank call me, the appraiser call me. They're trying to get comps. And this housing study every time has been handed to them. And they're like, oh, thank you. This is really helpful. So again, it doesn't solve the problem, but it does quantify it from an expert third party, at least to give you a framework. You'll notice there should be somewhere. So I used to work in mutual funds, and at the bottom of prospectuses, they say, past performance is no guarantee of future success. It's the same thing with housing studies. You're looking at the past market, what has happened in the recent past, what's happening now, and then based on that is projections for the need. So it's not, there's no crystal ball, but it does help. On here is just our website link. If you want to go check out our housing study, we had the EDA in Cook County commissioned one. It was done July last year, it was published, give you an idea of what kind of information you can get from them, assuming you haven't seen them. Okay, the second piece here, get to know your market. I'll be brief about this. These are two graphs from Cook County. The left graph, like it says, is cumulative number of residential sales since 2018. The right is basically the dollar amount of all of those sales. Obviously, they go up because there's more sales, there's more money. If you were to take like a pen or something and try to follow the 2020 line, you'd see that the average residential price is about $227,000. Over the year, that's the average. So you'd have to take that divided by the number. Now, as of end of May, the most recent data we have in Cook County, the average residential sale price is $378, I believe. So it's about a 66% increase in 3 years. And keep in mind, this is residential, which is inclusive of cabins and residential vacant land. My point is, knowing some of this data or getting access to people who do know it, having that, I can go to talk to people and say like, hey, it's not just the housing study. Here's really recent data showing we have no inventory. We have like really fast appreciation of prices. We need help. Developers need to know that. They need to know that there's a demand for what they're going to build. Absorptions are, and we're talking about multifamily particularly, absorption's a big question in smaller rural communities. It's not as big of a deal in, say, Duluth or the metro area. But when you're talking about Grand Marais or Hibbing or Bowabic or wherever, pick your community, that's a big question. If we build it, how big's the risk? Okay. Waiting for the next slide. Cool, thank you. How much new says, almost wrap this one up. Do your elected officials and appointed folks, do they agree that you need housing? So, and not just, yes, we need more housing. Do they really, like how much? And do they really agree that you need it, and are they willing to show up? Like that's a different conversation. So I think it's important to make sure that you can handle, like when you get a housing study, you can share it with all of these decision makers and help explain it, unpack it for them, walk through it, do a presentation. This is what it says. This is like, I'm not making it up. What do we think about this? So for Switchback Village, I did, when I first started with the HRA, I did a lot of community engagement. Actually, the snippet on the right that says WTIP at the top. Those are the first years of interviews and presentations and things, just a snapshot from our website. If you're really bored, you can go and click them and it'll bring you to the articles or whatever. But the point is, like, that's the community engagement I was trying to do to build consensus and at least understanding what the problem is. Not just that we need more housing, but what kind, how much, what's the need, all of those things. So we had a housing summit. We promoted the housing study findings. We talked to community groups and our decision makers. I presented at businesses, the hospital, like all over whoever would listen, because it was really important to not just understand, yes, we need more housing, but this is why. The math is really bad. This is why we don't have as much as we need, laying the groundwork. Okay, the next question to ask is what kind of housing? These are largely, it's not an exhaustive list, but on the left, determining factors. Obviously demand, sure, yeah, that's going to determine what kind of housing you build. But also things like zoning, the micro and macroeconomic environments, the availability of land, population and demographics. Now I could have drawn arrows, I guess, coming from one column to the next. How this impacted our project, it's sort of interesting. In Cook County, there's the demand does not actually equal reality a lot of the time. And maybe some of you experience this too. A lot of people who move up to Cook County say, I'm looking for 5 acres, preferably on Lake Superior, but maybe with a lake view. And maybe some water running through it. I'm like, that sounds great. I would love that too. But the reality is those are few and far between. And so my point here is to say that demand does not necessarily mean what you can provide is going to directly, you're not going to be able to provide exactly what people may think they want. But when the housing demand is sufficient enough, units are units, and you have to relieve that pressure valve. So zoning, density is king, I wrote, because in Cook County, there's no natural gas. Actually, in the North Shore, Silver Bay is the last stop for natural gas. And in Cook County, Grand Marais is the only place with city public infrastructure like sewer and water. There's another small district along the shore near Toffee, but for all intents and purposes, if you want to get density, Grand Marais is the most cost-effective place to do it. So can you build it? So zoning, I could do a whole thing on zoning. I'm not going to go into that, but it really is important, and it marries very closely with the microeconomic environment. I put bang for buck, because when you're talking about multifamily or trying to relieve the pressure and put stock into your market, multifamily is the fastest way to do it. You use less land, there's less of an impact, you get more and especially when you're talking about trying to use resources. So we're local government, we have finite amount of resources. This is the same from any funder in the call, on the meeting here, we'll tell you the same thing. We want to leverage what we can give you to create as much as we possibly can. Like every funder wants to say, hey, we gave you $1 million and it created 100 units or whatever. That'd be awesome. Everybody wants that, and the local government wants that too. We're going to be putting leveraging dollars in. We want to get as much as we can. So bang for buck matters. Rate, environment, and timing just happened to be the case. Unfortunately, that when we started working on this project and started really digging in, the Federal Reserve said, let's raise rates quite a bit. So that makes things more complicated. And what that did, people might not, if you're not in the finance space, you might not know that it's not just the rate environment changed. Like, in other words, rates went up, lending got tighter, and it's still tighter. So what that means for this project, for example, is where in the past you might have got 80% loan to value, now they're dealing with 65. So that means there's a huge equity gap there that needs to be filled. And a lot of developers are like, hey, that's a lot on the table. And that's part of the reason you're starting to see some smaller projects. It's a lot less equity to build 50 units than it is to build 200 units. So you're going to see some changes in some project scale, I think, over the medium term here. But anyway, quick to the last two things. Cook County, this is amazing to me. In Cook County, over 91% of the property is publicly owned. So we have 3,300 square miles. It's a big county, 5,600 people. So there's a lot more trees than people. And most of that property is owned by the U.S. Forest Service of the DNR. So why does that matter? Okay, well, there's 9% left. Of that 9%, what's already built? Okay, remove that. Okay, of that, what's actually available? Okay, it's like when you do the layering, there's like this much land available. So for us, that's a really big deal. So we had to identify what actually could we get our hands on to help with a housing project. And going through that process took a few months, super important. Last thing, 81st out of 87, that's with regard to population. Again, 5,600. We're almost in last place, not quite. But we also have the oldest, most people over the age 18 in the state. So we have a very old retirement population. Our household income is 60,000. So these are the kinds of things that really shape what can you build. Developers are going to need to know this kind of thing. What's the market we're building for, and can the people that live there afford it? These are all things that dictate what kind you build. Okay, next. Thanks, Jer. Sorry, lots to cover. Where can it go? Do you have a comp plan? Is it from like 1986 or 2002? Could it be refreshed? If you have one, it's probably a good idea to look at it. The reason I say that is because with Switchback Village, the parcel, it's kind of, sorry, I had to put it this way because it didn't fit this way. That's the property that the city of Grand Marais gave the HRA for $1. Very excited to get it. It's about 12 acres in city limits. It's, like I said, it's right around the curve of the Gunflint Trail. They're going to be building on the southern parcel for phase 1 and potentially the middle for phase 2. My point is, when we got it, it was zoned recreational. We couldn't even build housing on it. When they rezoned this about a year and a half ago or so, before the HRA was around, and it's adjacent to a future recreation area on the other side of the Gunflint, so it just kind of made sense. They're like, well, we don't know what else to do with it. Let's clump it in there. The point is, should it go here? We thought it should. We thought this is a site in town that can actually big enough to host a multifamily project like this, but it wasn't zoned appropriately. So we had to do a lot of working with the planning commission, the city council. There were 7 public meetings for this project so far. And we had to get it rezoned to R1 to be contiguous with the neighborhood next across the other street. And that didn't allow multifamily either. So we had to get a conditional use permit. That's where the public process got super fun. And I'll talk about NIMBYism there in a minute. Okay, we can keep cruising. What about the math? Yes, this is that other question. Super important one. Maybe I should have started with this, but you have to get all of that together. You have to know, you have to do all those other things before you can even get to this place with the developer. So I would venture a guess, the number one reason you're not having housing built wherever you are, multifamily or otherwise, is because it's a bad math problem. It just doesn't work. We're all here because we can't get it. And if the financial incentives were such where we could, that the math would work and we would not be talking. But by way of example, these are the things to really ask your community. What are your incomes, like the household income? What are the rents and home prices? Compare that to what it costs to build. So this is just when I was preparing these slides, I literally went on realtor.com and I was like, well, let's look at Hibbing. And I went to Hibbing and I pulled this, and this is, I think it's still listed. It just went down, in fact. If you look through the pictures, from my perspective, it's a lovely home. And it's selling for $113 a square foot. That's crazy to me, at least in our market in Cook County, that's cheap. But when it cost about $210 a square foot to build that or more, you can see there's a problem. So existing housing infrastructure, sure. If you want to build more, how do you make that math work? You can't build it and then sell it and take a loss every time, right? Same thing with rental prices. So the project, this is just market, is about $260 a square foot to build. That's about market cost. What does that mean when you translate to rent? You've got to rent it for $2 more a square foot. So then you look at, okay, that's the cost to rent from a market perspective. What can the people afford who live here? Often mismatch, right? So it's not working. The market's not working right now for most people, which is why we're talking, which is why I have a job. I wish I didn't have a job because of that, because the housing would be working. That would be great. I would do something else. Okay, next slide. I know I'm talking fast. I'm trying to cruise through it because we got to keep other people that have great things to talk about. This, people like to see the funding sources. This is the funding stack for Sawtooth. I almost called it Sawtooth Flats. Sorry, Switchback Village, the new name, it just changed. These are the folks that are involved. So the city gave us the property for, like I said, for $1, which was fantastic. IRRR, and I believe that Whitney's going to be talking about this in a little bit. They are awesome. They're coming to the table with $500,000 for infrastructure. We're matching that. The county, we asked the county for American Rescue Plan Act. That's part of the COVID relief package. We asked them for money for housing and made it explicit. It's explicit that money that they gave the HRA is project money, not administrative costs. It's going into the dirt. It's doing projects. So they have been fantastic partners. They gave us that money. We're providing some pre-development dollars. And all of this package together gets us to a place where they can build it. And so now they're hoping that we have some wetlands we're working on, but they're hoping to get in the ground in the next month, or at least start. Okay, role of local government. the huge topic, I can't, right. With regard to this project in housing development, oversimplification, but one is serving and protecting the public's interest. That's the role. That can look a lot of different ways. So, if you have people coming to your board meetings or your council meetings and they're saying, I'm the public and my interest is to not have that built in my backyard. Well, technically that's the public's interest, but also the public interest is having housing built. We need more housing. So a framework that I kind of adopt whenever I'm doing this project is, if any of you are familiar with Kant, it's utilitarianism, maximizing pleasure, reducing pain. Like that's the objective of local government. How do we maximize the positive outcomes and mitigate the negative outcomes? I'm sorry, it's a really nerdy reference. Anyway, so we have to operate in that tension, knowing that no matter what you do, any change, someone's not going to like it. Like if you build nothing, people will be upset. If you build something, people will be upset. That's our job, is to navigate those waters and to understand that we're not going to make everybody happy, but our objective is, we know we need housing for all the litany of reasons that have already been talked about. Sorry, but this is the best. Like, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. I've had to say that a number of times. There's no perfect project, but this is what we have, and we think it's going to be on a net positive for our community. We're going to do it. So just quickly, these are the kinds of things, and actually I'll be talking about this in the breakout section of how to do recruitment and attraction for developers, but sort of like 3 buckets: policies, politics, pocketbooks. Those are things that help guide and assist development happening. That's how you set the table. The snapshot at the left is just to show you this is, we asked for our CUP for the right to do 2 phases at once for Switchback Village. There was a lot of conversation about it. In the end, the council and the planning commission decided, you know what? We're gonna start with 1. We think that's in the better interest of the community, see how this goes. 51 units for some places is nothing. For Grand Marais, it's the biggest apartment that's ever been built. So and I had to actually work it down. I talked with multiple developers and they wanted to go bigger to get economies of scale. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. So we got it down to 51 units, but it was more comfortable for the decision makers to start with 1 phase, see how it goes, see that it gets absorbed, and then they can come back and get permission for the 2nd phase. And that's just some of those compromises and negotiations you have to do. They weren't jazzed about it, but they also recognize, hey, if they perform and they do what they say they're going to do, and it's a good project, community is going to want them back. Okay, last thing is to talk about NIMBYism quickly. For those of you who don't know fun planning acronyms, it means not in my backyard-ism. Yes, it's a thing, and it's still around, I can tell you. It's doing pretty well. So it's gonna, like I said before, it's going to come up. You're going to have people that don't like your project. But if you know, because you've done the homework, how much you need, what kind of housing you need, where you can and should put it. You've solved that math problem by creating that capital stack and doing the funding sources and getting a developer on the same page. And if you have leaders at least have an understanding of the problem, and if not total consensus, you have buy-in from enough people, it's really hard to say no to housing. Like, you can't, you can say, I don't like the project because I don't want it there. But again, people have a really difficult time saying, I don't think we need more housing in X community, because that's not the reality. So Switchback Village, we had, like I said, 7 public meetings. The most exciting one is, yeah, sorry, somebody asked, Switchback is a rental. It's a mixed income rental project. Saw that in the comments. The CUP meeting was particularly fun. That's where we were asking for specific permission to build this project. There was standing room only by the end of it. There was a Facebook petition that was signed that one of the local residents brought. It had 106 signatures against the project. Apparently, though, a lot of those people didn't live in Cook County. There are people that like to come up to visit Cook County that want to keep it, I don't know, nostalgic the way that they remember coming to visit. And it's very strange. Rumors were started about the developer, about the HRA, about myself, with no basis but to poison the well, which was super interesting. I haven't had that before. But you have to learn how to navigate all those sorts of things in a smaller community. One of the concerns, of course, is people generally know what people like. Everybody knows everything, and you can't escape. Like, when you make a decision as a council member or as a commissioner. In Duluth, I remember when I worked for the city of Duluth, I had 87,000 bosses, but I didn't see most of them. In Cook County, I have 5,600 of them, and I think I've met half the county. But when the decision makers are sitting at a table and they make the decision, they have to look their neighbor in the eye and say, I'm sorry you disagree with this, but this is the right thing to do. Fortunately, we had enough people that understood the need, and there was enough, the community has been awesome. There was enough support. We had twice as many people there in support of the project than were against it. And we had people writing in emails, and we had, like I said, 7 meetings, and people showed up at every meeting. So the only way to really counteract NIMBYism, from my opinion and experience, provide the information, educate, and then make the voice of support louder than the voice against. That means that you're doing a favor for your decision makers, because then they can say, hey, more people are asking us to do it, and it just makes it easier for them to say yes. And we had unanimous approval for all of these things. But it took a lot of this step by step process. Okay, that was a lot. Thank you. Again, if you don't want to hear me talk more, don't attend the breakout session. But thank you very much for having me. This is super fun.
Thank you, Jason. That was fantastic. You went a little bit extra, but it was so interesting. I just didn't want to shorten that up at all.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Quick question. Who is your architect? Because it's a beautiful design, and that does go a long way.
Yep, the developer has their own architect that they contract with.
Yep.
And the name, I'd have to look it up. The name escapes me, actually.
Yeah,
I can send it to you.
Compliments on the design too.
Oh, thank you. I'll let them know.
And we look forward to seeing that project get built. So next, our speaker is Whitney Ridlin. Iron Range Resources and Rehabilitation Grant and other opportunities for partnering on affordable housing. Thanks, Whitney, for joining us.
Thanks, Warren. Good morning, everyone. As Warren said, my name is Whitney Ridlon. I serve as a community development representative at the Department of Iron Range Resources and Rehabilitation. Both my teammates are on today, Chris and Danae, and together we administer a variety of different grant programs that help build technical capacity and provide funding to projects, including housing. So the agency is a tool in the toolbox in rural northeastern Minnesota. To date, our role has really been to better understand what kind of resources are out there, what other communities are doing. I spend a lot of time on the phone with people like Jason Hale or Isaac Meyer over in Itasca County to try to better understand how they're working through these projects and how the agency can be better beneficial to our communities. I think that Jason brought up a really good example is, you know, he's at a higher capacity and he's able to work through these issues. But a lot of our communities in rural Northeast, they don't know where, how much, or what kind of housing. So when he said that at the beginning, I thought, right? So we work with communities that are up there and can help us learn how to do our projects better. But then we also need to kind of get our other communities that aren't as big of a capacity to help go through those kind of processes. Just for people who aren't aware, the Iron Range Resources and Rehabilitation is a regional economic development agency established in 1941 by Governor Harold Stassen and the legislature. The agency was created to diversify the economy of a region largely dependent on a natural resource-based economy, primarily iron mining. Next slide. Our service area, for those of you that don't know, is defined in state statutes, and it's the boundaries of school districts containing unmined iron ore deposits, taconite plants, or electric generating plants that supply electricity to taconite operations. So just, you know, usually you know if you're in the service area, but for those outsiders or those from outside rural northeastern Minnesota, if you're working with our communities and you're within the taconite service area, then you're eligible for agency financial resources. Next slide. The agency's mission is to invest resources to foster vibrant growth and economic prosperity in northeastern Minnesota by enhancing livable communities, maximizing collaboration and partnerships, and strengthening business and worker education. Next slide. So here's kind of the meat of the presentation. I wanted to give everyone who wasn't aware a little 101 of the IRRB. But there's some things the agency's been increasing its role on in housing. And this is based directly on our feedback from our local employers and our business owners and communities. We are consistently hearing from these employers who have lost a potential employee hire due to lack of housing that meets their needs. Or we see people working in rural Northeast, but commuting long distances. In the city of Chisholm hired a recreation coordinator who commuted from Duluth for 5 months before they found the housing choice opportunity that really worked for them. So those kind of examples and stories are just reoccurring that we hear all the time. So the agency's been really trying to better understand our role in housing. And so to help build capacity and better understand the housing landscape, the agency financially supported and helped plan the November Rural St. Louis County Housing Summit. This was held kind of in tandem, as Jason referenced, Cook County was doing a similar thing. And then this spring, Itasca County held a very similar event. These events were a direct partnership between RAMS, the Range Association of Municipalities and Schools, the local communities, the Chamber of Commerce's, the tourism boards, and the IRRR. At the Rural St. Louis County Forum, we had over 120 attendees. The event kicked off with a highly successful panel of the regional employers, and they also did that over in Itasca County, just to really highlight from those HR directors what they're experiencing and hearing related to housing. At these events, we had elected officials, developers, buildings and trades, city staff, private business, and many more. And what we did was we just kind of learned what's going on. What are some of those best practices? Who is the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund? Who is Minnesota Housing Partnership? You know, what's on deck at Minnesota Housing? Try to just really understand the landscape better. So then to keep that momentum going, because it was very evident at that summit that so many people attended, and to continue our pathway of discovery, the agency has been hosting subsequent lunch and learns, just bringing forth case studies to our communities to help better connect them to resources, examples of how these projects are put together. I mean, I was listening to Jason Hale just right now, and I'm thinking, oh, we should bring that project into a virtual lunch and learn for a case study. So these are always just kind of like learning what's going out there and try to bring it to our communities in a really simple, easy to hear kind of way. Our goal is to like let people informally, if they're driving in the car, turn everything off and just listen and learn something about housing and not have to intentionally come to a formal summit or event to keep building their capacity. Let's see. I guess I just kind of listed some of the ones, you know, Minnesota Housing Partnership is hosting their Housing Institute in rural northeastern Minnesota. So that's really exciting. So we kicked off bringing them in. We brought in Three Rivers Community Action to talk about nonprofit-led housing development. We were hearing a lot about housing trust funds. So how do we bring, you know, we brought the Red Wing HRA in just to talk about how they were doing that. And then most recently, we had Warren come talk about employer-assisted housing. So that's kind of what we've been doing on the capacity building side. Currently, the agency offers various different loan and grant programs that support business, community, and workforce development. Many of these existing opportunities already support housing. So for example, the agency's financially supported with an infrastructure grant to support the housing development that Jason Hale's working on in Grand Marais. We've also have a commercial redevelopment program that is paid for interior demo to help rehab a multifamily housing building in West Evelyn. We've also traditionally, via our residential redevelopment program, demoed blighted housing to hopefully make way for vacant lots for new housing to get built upon. And we've seen some success with Habitat for Humanity and others developing on those vacant lots, but there's definitely opportunity for more to happen there. In the last year, the agency has also piloted small amount of funds to community and HRA housing partnerships. So this has included helping fund the construction gap for the Itasca County HRA to develop community land trust homes. And the other significant way we've been coming in is on that pre-development or site readiness work for funding for cities to move sites more towards being attractive for a housing developer. So the agency has been partnering with communities to offset the costs on things like the market studies Jason talked about, survey work, soil borings, test pits, phase 1s, phase 2s, all those things where a community can kind of say, hey, this is a site for housing in our community. We are going to take initiative to remove any unknown barriers as it relates to site development and hopefully be able to engage with developers in a more in a higher level way that eliminates the risk to those builders and developers who haven't traditionally maybe thought of doing that kind of work in rural northeastern Minnesota. We want to entice the private investment with the ultimate goal of having a lot of these publicly owned parcels get put back on the tax rolls. So overall, the agency remains highly engaged in housing, and we're at the table to try to connect communities to resources to make housing happen. We're currently exploring how to strengthen our commitment and our financial resources to further support housing solutions that align with local priorities, market realities, and bring home some of that major Minnesota housing investment to our region. Next slide. For those of you who aren't engaged, the best opportunity to find out about resources at the agency is to subscribe to our Ranger newsletter. I have the link here. You can go to our website and sign up. Any new programming or case studies, we often highlight examples of how we participated in a project, would be available on the Ranger newsletter. So with that, I'd be happy to pass the baton.
Well, thank you, Whitney, and thanks to the IRRR for being here today and for everything that you've done over the decades to pave the way for sites for affordable housing, other support, and things that you might be doing different in the future. That's exciting to hear about. We are probably just a little bit behind, but what great content. And as scheduled, we're going to take a 5-minute break right now. Actually, we might be a little bit ahead of schedule. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. And during that time, just feel free to fill up your coffee and do anything else that you want to do. And we will return and reconvene here at, I guess, 10:18, pretty close to 10:20, but please come right back and we'll see you in 5 minutes. Okay, that was quick. And we're going to proceed with the rest of the program. Welcome back from the break. We're going to hear next from Ryan Baumtrog, who is Assistant Commissioner for Policy and Community Development at Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. And welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, Warren, and good morning, everybody, for those that are back at their desk. Great to be with you today and appreciate the time to talk about a historic legislative session that ended just a few weeks ago. I'm just pleased, Minnesota Housing has been working really on the budget that passed recently since last fall, and in dialogue with communities and organizations and people all across the state. And I'm happy with session ending just a few weeks ago with some significant resources for housing. Specifically for the agency, there will be $1.3 billion of resources coming to the agency across all of our existing programs, and then a significant number of new programs and activities to fund a wide range of housing all across the state. We went into this budget session with the governor's office and others, recognizing that every community in the state needs housing. They need resources to both build new housing, to preserve existing housing, to help first-time home buyers, and to help renters pay their rents and everything in between. And so we really put together a budget and ended up with a budget that we think meets all of those. So with $1.3 billion total, it's a significant number, especially considering the agency typically receives just over $100 million every 2 years. So this is a huge infusion of mostly one-time resources that will help do a lot of housing over the next few years. On the next slide, this really is just a framework that I wanted to lift up and share, because it was kind of our guiding policy vision and principles throughout the entire process. And one of the key things that I just wanted to make sure people knew is, as we go into legislative session and as we do events like this, our staff are listening, about the needs of each community, each region, and that all gets filtered up to then what we talk about with the governor's office and up at the Capitol about the needs. And certainly with 1.3 billion, and I'll go through, some programs in a little bit, and some areas of where the budget is allocated, but it really is across all of the different needs that we hear about and that we know that communities are facing. So the governor started things off in January. On the next slide, I just have, I tried not to do too many numbers, even though we're talking about the legislative session and the budget, but wanted to just show one thing that we're really excited about is, just the sheer amount of resources is obviously great, but then also up at the Capitol, what we have now is more committees and more elected officials really focusing on housing. And that's been an increasing trend since for the last legislative sessions, but it really culminated with a really big outcome this year. So the governor put together his budget, and that kind of kicks off the whole process in January, recommending over $1.1 billion for housing in both a budget bill and a capital investment bill. And what we saw throughout session is the legislature both acting a little quickly to provide some homelessness prevention resources, $50 million. But then I'll be willing to go a little bit higher than the governor even did with his budget to provide more resources. And this came in both our housing budget bill, but capital investment bills, and some pretty significant resources for housing in the tax bill. And one thing to point out here is I list off these dollar amounts and some of the agency's programs, it's not the totality of all the housing and homelessness resources that will be available and flowing from the state to counties and cities. There is a significant amount of local housing aid that will be distributed to cities and counties. And then a really significant investments in homeless shelter capital and other programs more on the health and human services side of the programs to really help individuals help pay for housing. So this is just Minnesota Housing's part, but there was a really robust amount of housing and homelessness funding that came from the legislature this session, and we hope that that is something that continues for years to come. On the next slide, for those more visually inclined, on the left-hand side, you see kind of the split of the agency's resources based on kind of housing topic, housing area. So kind of split pretty evenly between our development programs to build more homes and create new, build new, and the housing stability. And those are programs like rental assistance, homelessness prevention resources, kind of split evenly there, with just a little small amount for down payment assistance that the agency receives from the state. And then on the right-hand side, you see the preservation and creation of more homes is about 51% of the state resources that are coming this way. So kind of held true on about half of the state resources coming to Minnesota Housing for development. And when I say development, it's single family, it's rental, it's also manufactured home, park infrastructure. So very broad use of the word for housing development. And then while housing stability resources went down proportionately, we did get significant increases for rental assistance and homelessness prevention. But really what this slide shows is the legislature made significant investments, over $200 million in first-time home buyer down payment assistance, and really a focus, nearly $150 million for first-generation home buyers. So that's one topic and area where we just saw huge interest and a significant amount of the final budget going for first-time home buyers. On the next slide, again, the legislature invested in nearly all of the agency's existing programs, and then created more than 15 new programs and activities. And I didn't want to, wouldn't be helpful to go through all of those, but I want to just call out the ones that particularly think serve this region well, and are some that we're really excited about for a couple of the new programs. So the first program on the top left, we call that the Challenge program. It funds both multifamily rental, primarily new construction rental, and then on the home ownership space does a lot of activities, from down payment assistance, owner occupied rehab, as well as acquisition resale. So it's really one of the agency's more flexible programs to respond to community housing needs. And we saw an increase from 25 million to 120 million. So a really, really healthy increase to that program. And we're open for applications right now. So we know many communities and partners, I see a couple on this call, are working on some applications for that funding round that closes in July. Also, the housing infrastructure program got $200 million. This has been the agency's program that gets the largest capital infusions from the state, including this year. And it funds a wide range of housing activities, both multifamily and single family, and also manufactured home park infrastructure. It has a kind of policy focus on senior housing, as well as permanent supportive housing for individuals and families facing homelessness. Those are some of the main policy goals and projects that get funded out of housing infrastructure. And recently, with some expansions from the legislature, has been starting to do even more single family work, as well as manufactured home park infrastructure. So this is a really flexible capital program that can be used to help meet a wide range of community housing needs. One of the biggest kind of percentage increases that we got was the workforce homeownership development program. On the previous slide mentioned the significant increase in down payment assistance. We also know that there's not enough single family homes that are affordable for sale, and we know that new construction needs to increase as an activity funded from the agency. And so the workforce homeownership development program is going from a really small program, $500,000 every 2 years, to $60.5 million. And this is exclusively for homeownership development, really focused on new construction. And this is a program that has served Greater Minnesota really well, even at smaller dollar amounts, and are really excited about what this program can produce with such a huge dollar infusion. On the rental side, the other program that we have that serves exclusively Greater Minnesota and has been doing some amazing work in communities with populations fewer than 5,000 people is the Greater Minnesota Workforce Housing Program, which is growing from $4 million to $39 million. And so this is a huge increase to this program that we're really excited about, because this is one of the main programs that's adding new, can be market rate with affordable units in Greater Minnesota. I'm really happy that this program can go to a scale that's really needed to add the new housing in really kind of smaller communities. The Local Housing Trust Fund Match Program. So this is a state match where localities that have or are planning to create a local housing trust fund that will have some dedicated revenues for housing, the state will be able to match either new revenues or increases in revenues with a state matching program of 5.8. We had $1 million so previously. So $5.8 million will be available for the state to match, and really be an incentive for more communities to create local housing trust funds, to think about how they can support and build more housing in their communities. And then the last program to highlight is the Greater Minnesota Housing Infrastructure Program. And this will be a new $8 million program. And this is really it's exclusively for Greater Minnesota, and it's in recognition of the barriers around public infrastructure to building new housing. And so this program is just about the public infrastructure that's needed to do the housing development. And so this is something we have heard as we've gone around the state, and certainly heard up at the Capitol, of just the high costs to build new homes, and how much having resources for public infrastructure and offsetting those costs could really help unlock some capital and unlock some more housing opportunities in Greater Minnesota. So really excited to have that opportunity to serve the region and help build more housing where public infrastructure is a real barrier to building the housing. So what's next for the agency is, I mentioned a couple of the programs like the Challenge program and housing infrastructure, and the workforce homeownership program, and the Greater Minnesota Workforce Housing. And I mentioned those because those are the programs where this infusion of resources that we got from the state capitol, those are the programs where we have staff, we have applications, we have processes. And so those are the programs where partners and communities will be applying to and receiving most of the resources from the legislature first. That was something important in the governor's budget, and through the legislative processes, we wanted to make sure that the programs that got created and the funding that came, that we'd be able to get it out to communities in a timely fashion. And so for the existing programs and the new amounts, those are resources that we'll start getting into communities really this fall, with applications due in just over a month. From there, we'll be, I shouldn't say from there, at the same time, we're looking at, all of the new programs and putting together staffing models and plans and position descriptions so that we can hire the staff that we'll need to staff up to really have the full complement of agency resources to deploy the $1.3 billion from the legislature. So we'll be in go big staffing mode. So if you have great people, send them our way. And then once we, get new staff on board for the team, we'll do everything that it takes to launch a program and do the stakeholder outreach and put together the guides and funding processes and grant, everything, all the details, important details it takes to get the funds into community. And we're really excited. I mean, some of the programs, the Greater Minnesota Housing Infrastructure one, I wanted to hit on that because that's just something we've heard for years. It's both a housing and an economic development tool that we think will be able to just create a lot more housing in communities, and we're excited to be a part of it. So with that, happy to answer any questions, and I'll put my contact information in the chat. And if people have questions now, great. Otherwise, you will have my contact information if you want to follow up on anything.
Well, thanks, Ryan. And we do have a few minutes here. I think we should open it up for a couple of questions. Anybody want to volunteer their question to Ryan about the legislative results? And I have one question just to kind of lead off a little bit, Ryan. I know you mentioned that there's going to be a lot of engagement and workshops by the agency as these new programs and the funding schedules get ironed out. Do you know when those will start?
Yeah, that's a great question, Warren. Well, first, we're going to build out something on our website. Don't know what yet, but kind of hopefully a kind of one-stop shop where people can go to because not everybody's going to know the program names or be linked into our timing. So we're going to find some way on our website, and I think that will be the best way for people to stay in touch, because we have so many funding programs and federal requirements. We're in community a lot listening. But there might be specific programs that people will want to stay in touch in. So we're going to create some infrastructure on our websites that will help people be able to track the things that they want to track about the new program. So to be determined exactly on that, but that's something that we know stakeholders are really interested in, is how do I follow this program? How do I follow the totality of these resources as they get out into community? So we're going to spend some time putting together some infrastructure on that.
Great.
I saw Warren Whitney had a question in the chat about stacking Greater Minnesota workforce housing. So the development dollars that actually build the housing, and then the Greater Minnesota infrastructure dollars, can they be stacked together? And we worked with stakeholders, in this case, Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, so that we add language so that they could potentially stack together, but they're not required to. Because that was one question the agency had, because this wasn't a agency program, is, well, are you envisioning, as developers and communities think about this, they probably have needs for both the housing, to build the housing, and the infrastructure. Do you want to pair these together? And that was something they were open to, but had not been thinking about. So we got some language that could potentially allow us to with applications fund both the housing development through one program and the infrastructure with another program. So we'll see if that all works, but as we were getting down to the final bill language, understood that, from a community perspective, if it's a new development, there's infrastructure costs and housing costs. And so if we could find a way to combine two programs into one for our partners, we thought that was worth spending a little time exploring.
Any other questions for Ryan?
Looks Chris has a question about any new programs award funds in this year's RFP. And the answer is no. So there won't be any new program that development program that will be awarding funds through the consolidated RFP process.
Any other questions for Ryan?
Just to follow up, is that the consolidated process that opens like in the next month or two? Is that the one you're referring to? Okay.
Yeah, good question. That's it's the process, the kind of annual consolidated, we call it the consolidated RFP, where it's both rental housing and home ownership. And it's not just one program, it's not just a preservation, it's also new construction. And so it's where applicants put together a pretty healthy amount of work to put together an application, but then it makes it available for the wide range of resources that the agency has, both federal funds and tax credits and also state resources. So it's a kind of a one-stop shop for the up to, basically 15 different funds that we get from the federal government and state government.
And so you would envision the first time having the new funding in that being next year, or is there a winter one?
So the new funding that the agency received for existing programs will be awarded this year for the existing programs. For where there's a new program, that will either be next year, or depending on the program, it might have its own standalone RFP. So like the greater Minnesota infrastructure programs are probably a prime example. I find it hard to believe that we would include that in the consolidated RFP just because it's just infrastructure. So, that will be its own RFP, or maybe some planning work with the Greater Minnesota Housing Development Program, but not a part of the consolidated RFP. So it really is kind of program by program, whether it will go into the consolidated or have its own funding process. All of this is why having a website to help direct and guide, given the 1.3 and other tools, not just the website, but is kind of critical to help tracking where all the dollars will go. Looks like another question around new funding for culturally specific capacity building and development. There is, and actually Alyssa Wetzel-Moore, our community development director, is on the call, and she can jump in to miss anything. But this is a space where we got $5 million from the legislature one time to do some capacity building programs, and certainly building the capacity of kind of culturally specific providers and developers and things like that is a really big program goal for that program. And so with $5 million, we expect some really good opportunity to build some capacity in this space.
Okay. Maybe that's where we'll end this part of it and move along. One comment I would make, and it's kind of implicit in everything that Ryan and other people are talking about, which is your pipeline of projects at the local and regional level is now looking much more promising. And the agency will be able to go deeper down the list of top applicants. Still needs to be a great project, still needs to pencil out and have all the right qualities. But as we know, there's never been enough money, and probably won't be enough money even this round. But the applications are going to be the way we'll see how that works out. And I'm sure we'll see many more funded projects this round. We are going to move on to a couple of updates and initiatives from 3 areas of funding. These are, kind of specialized programs of Minnesota Housing Partnership and of Greater Minnesota Housing Fund. We're just going to highlight 3 of them. We'll talk, and each person will just talk for about 3 minutes. Initially, we're going to hear from Irene Ruiz-Bresenio on Emerging Developers of Color capacity building program and other emerging developers. And then we'll hear from Eric Muschler, who's the director of Greater Minnesota Housing Fund's Housing and Health Equity Initiative, about the potential and the kind of trend of healthcare facilities, healthcare organizations investing in affordable housing. And then we'll hear from Donald Gogolai about the programs of Minnesota Housing Partnership for capacity building and emerging developer work. So Irene, it's all yours.
Thank you, Warren. Good morning, everyone. And as Warren mentioned, my name is Irene Ruiz-Briceño. I'm with the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, and I have the great privilege of being the program manager for our Emerging Developers of Color Capacity Building program. This program was established in November of 2021, which it's a statewide program that was launched to address the underrepresentation of investors and developers of color within the affordable housing industry, with an overarching goal to really disrupt the systemic racial barriers to financing and promote more equitable real estate investment and development. This slide outlines some of the key objectives and the impact that we are hoping to achieve with this initiative. Like I mentioned, we want to increase the racial diversity in the affordable housing industry. We want the market to become more inclusive of all developers, particularly developers of color, and that they are able to participate, build their capacity so that they can participate in more opportunities. Developers of color will build assets, wealth, and income, and they'll help to contribute to the overall production and preservation of affordable homes, which, as you've been hearing throughout the morning, we desperately need in all regions of the state. And as more diverse developers come to the market, we believe that the housing system will be better equipped to meet the diverse needs of the various communities that we have across the great state of Minnesota. Next slide. This slide outlines some of our program accomplishments. So we're very proud to report that in the first phase of the program, Greater Minnesota Housing Fund closed on $13.9 million in flexible low-cost loan capital for projects being led by emerging developers of color. We also awarded $475,000 in pre-development grants, which was a big need that we heard from developers that were emerging and trying to get an inaugural project done, is that access to that first money. This represented 23 different developments that we were able to support, and preserved or created 480 units of housing. So we're really proud of those accomplishments. And as you'll see in a future slide here, we didn't do it alone. Some of the capacity building interventions or things that we've been able to help with are assistance responding to various local RFPs for development opportunities. We conducted a real estate pro forma training. We're hoping to do another one. That seems to be a very repeated request for assistance, is pro forma training. How do we complete a pro forma? How do we analyze a pro forma and determine if my project is feasible and realistic? And if it's not, what are the things that we can change to make it get to that point? Our loan officers created a quick start guide, which really outlines the process. If you're going to use Greater Minnesota Housing Fund as your lending partner, what is the process start to finish? Who's responsible for what? What is the timeline? And that's been really helpful at creating some transparency around that process. We brought together a community of practice of developers of color who owned and operated small NOAA properties. So these are small unsubsidized properties that were experiencing various issues after the developers had closed and were taking over operations. Could be building improvements, capital needs, security, tenant issues, things like that. So we brought them together and we hosted, we also had some guest speakers from the property management community and Minnesota Multi-Housing Association, talk with those newer owner operators and discuss best practices and some solutions for addressing those problems. We established an advisory committee that came together late last year and will come together on an annual basis to gather feedback. These are external folks who understand GMHF and what we do, but also are practitioners in the housing industry and understand the issues in the broader industry and can really help guide us, make sure that we're on the right track with our programming and making the right impact. And we also have organized 2 emerging developer expos. So these are essentially resource fairs where Greater Minnesota Housing Fund and various other nonprofits, representatives from cities and counties, architects, general contractors, other CDFIs, anybody that's got a program or a resource to offer for emerging developers. We kind of come together and bring all of our materials together, and then emerging developers can walk through, network with folks, network with each other, and gather some information about the various programs. So our next expo is planned for sometime this October in the Rochester area. So we're excited to bring those expos out of the Twin Cities and into Greater Minnesota. Next slide. As I mentioned before, all of the success that we are very proud of with this program has widely been due to a lot of collaborative partnerships that we've been able to establish. We can't solve the housing crisis alone. We have to work collaboratively with each other. We have to learn about each other's programs. We can leverage each other's resources and leverage each other's staff. We can be more efficient and more effective if we work together. And so that, I think, is really a huge part of the success of this program, is other organizations willing to kind of link arms with us and help emerging developers. Some other examples of partnership and collaboration that we've seen that have been successful is a model where a larger developer will partner with an emerging developer on a specific project to help them build their capacity and gain some experience. We have helped developers connect with experienced development consultants that will help them with a particular project or transaction. We have been able to connect developers with other entities and programs to share information and resources and learn about other programs. And then we have created some opportunities for developers in the industry or wanting to break into the industry to network and learn from each other, meet each other, and build their professional relationships. I'm going to kind of zoom through this slide here. We've got some lessons learned and best practices. I think the goal here is just really to kind of keep an eye on the program and keep an eye closely on the projects that emerging developers are pushing forward, so that we can, in a spirit of continuous improvement, right? What went well? What are some best practices? What are some things that we can do differently to be more effective, more efficient, and to kind of help them overcome challenges and barriers in a better way? Next slide. So as you'll see there, the 3 main interventions that this program has brought to the space is capacity building through education and technical assistance, helping developers build their networks and relationships in an industry that's heavily dependent on networks and relationships, and then also providing access to capital and helping emerging developers recognize Greater Minnesota Housing Fund as a potential funding partner. My email address is on that slide there. I will also be facilitating one of the breakout rooms at the end of the forum here. So if you'd like to learn more, if you have specific questions, I look forward to connecting with you. Thanks. I'll pass it to Eric Muschler now.
Thank you, Irene. Good to be here, and it's great to hear the stories from the Northeast. I was actually up in Duluth last Friday. So my name's Eric Muschler. I'm the Director of Housing and Health Equity at the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund. And the program that I'm running wants to identify and lift up the good work of many of you. Many of you have housing and health equity efforts or connections that we really want to raise and highlight. The Housing and Health Equity Initiative promotes connections that create and expand housing and health equity partnerships, innovative practices and outcomes for people in place. Next slide. The overall goal of the initiative is around investment. So advancing investment and development of affordable housing as the most impactful social determinant of health. So partnering with healthcare and investment. The goal areas of the initiative include convening health leaders in a learning cohort, which I'll talk about in a second. Again, developing communities of practice, as with the emerging developers of color, really bringing together cross-sector networks of housing and healthcare, but also services in the mix, again, to create new projects and partnerships. We're really fostering a pipeline of projects, so we're building on existing work, but also identifying areas of opportunity and new projects that we can highlight and have replicated. As I said before, catalyzing upstream investments is really a core to it. And so engaging healthcare to think about upstream investments in social determinants of health and housing is sort of the gold medal. We also really track policy systems and practice so that we can highlight those things and bring together natural partnerships with housing and healthcare. So our experience and the experience of our partners show us that housing is health and housing stability is medicine. Next slide. So one of the most exciting efforts within the program right now is the Housing and Health Equity Fellows Program. In the beginning of the year, we kicked off the first ever Minnesota Housing and Health Equity Learning Cohort. This is 30 fellows from 6 of the top 10 health systems in the state. The cohort is coming together 6 times this year to learn about investment strategies and advance affordable housing development in their communities. Each healthcare system involved has sent a team of cross-departmental fellows from their systems to advance specific goals around affordable housing and investment practice on the part of their institution. So we have one statewide payor company, an insurance company, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota. And then there are 5 health systems, which are more referred to as providers most often, but mHealth Fairview, Allina, Children's Minnesota, Essentia, and Centricare. Now, Essentia and Centricare, they serve Greater Minnesota only in different regions of the state, while the other 3 serve the metro with just some facilities in Greater Minnesota. 2 of these entities, including Essentia, which is probably the highest interest here, have a clear anchor institution focus, meaning they're looking for, at their main facilities, an interest in investment related to and creating healthier and working communities around those facilities. Others are looking for ways to apply their knowledge around social determinants of health and housing into an integrative set of actions and investments in housing and the most critical social determinant of health. The group here has already expressed interest in possible collective ways where they could come together and work together on the issue of housing. Next slide. So we have a growing number of housing and health equity development examples from both the national and the state level. Some relate to permanent supportive housing, but others include the full gamut of housing, of the housing continuum. Like recovery housing, a project by Avivo, or serving homeless youth with enriched services, as in the 66 West Apartments in Edina, Minnesota, or ex-offender housing, Solace Apartments in St. Peter, Minnesota, and more mixed-use development with wellness centers or open space as part of the development, like Commons at Penn, or inclusion of even childcare, like in Cascade Creek in Rochester. We also have a couple in our pipeline right now where federally qualified health clinics are expanding and they want to build affordable housing with that expansion. So interesting new sort of mixed use development. So we want to work with you to engage healthcare partners more directly for housing funds and for housing developments, as well as document and share roles and investment practices that achieve 3 returns. One is safe financial returns, of course. Second is good programmatic returns. And finally, a set of learning returns that we can bring back into the housing and healthcare fields. One more slide, please. So what can we do next? Well, please sign up for the Housing and Health Equity mailing list on the gmhf.com website under the Housing and Health Equity Initiative pages. You'll receive stories of housing and health equity and updates and events that are taking place. And then really, we'd love you to share your story and your examples. So there is a submit a story button within those housing and health equity pages. where you can really just start to articulate the connections that you have with health-related activities and your housing development. And we can flesh those out more and really want to bring those out and share them across the systems. And then finally, register for the next virtual cross-sector event that we're pulling together next week, June 20th, Building Healthy Places as a Healthcare Housing Catalyst. So if you're a housing organization and you want to approach local healthcare institutions, please contact me. If you're a healthcare institution and you want to learn more, please reach out to me as well. Next slide. So here's my contact information, and we just want you to know that Greater Minnesota Housing Fund is deeply in the housing and health equity space. Our focus is engaging around the investment side of housing and health. We already have active investment relationships with some healthcare institutions. And we have the activities in place on the ground and the systems in place to expand partnerships with direct healthcare involvement as it relates to housing and social determinants of health. So I hope that's a quick summary and you can take from that. And please join in the session. We're going to do a breakout session as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to Donald from Minnesota Housing Partnership to talk about their work. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Eric, and good morning, everybody. My name is Donald Gagalay. I'm one of the community development managers at MHP. And today I'm just going to do an overview of our community development department. One of our goals, I guess our overarching goal is to build communities through collaboration. Rooted in Minnesota, but recognized as a leader nationwide, Minnesota Housing Partnership specializes in working with rural communities and tribal nations to strengthen their communities. MHP advocates for equitable housing policy, conducts research to inform solutions, and delivers community development services throughout the country. MHP's mission is to expand housing and community development opportunities for those most impacted by economic and racial disparities by leading collaborative work to promote system change and grow equitable development capacity. Next slide, please. We build community capacity to attract and utilize resources to address their own challenges. We assist communities in navigating and complying with complex federal programs. We also connect communities to resources and cultivate collaboration to turn their aspirations into action. We also emphasize assistance in rural and American Indian communities, not only in Minnesota, but throughout the country. Next slide, please. As I said, we're rooted in Minnesota, and this map just gives you an overview of the communities we've worked into since 2009 to 2020. There are some new ones we've been working on here recently. Most recent is the Tower Minnesota group, along with a few others on the Iron Range through our Housing Institute. Next slide, please. This is our nationwide map, and you can see with the larger green, darker circles, we have 3 or more engagements in that region. So we're pretty much everywhere right now, which is kind of unique and great at the same time. I've had an opportunity to work with folks down in New Mexico, Washington State, and Nebraska, as well as North Dakota. We have 3 other community development managers who have also traveled extensively to work with communities, Florida, the Appalachians, the Colonias in Texas, as well as the Black Belt down in central southern United States. Next slide, please. Okay, like I said, MHP has a number of Native Nation engagements, and you can see from the map here, we are all over the United States with this. You know, from a Native perspective too, there's 562 federally recognized tribes. So we're not there in all the communities, but definitely looking at identifying and working with those points of contacts. A lot of our tribal nations are very rural without a lot of infrastructure. Most importantly, I guess, most is the broadband issue. So again, we're working at identifying and working with a lot of different communities in our tribal engagements. Next slide, please. So our technical assistance structure, we have three distinct programs. The Strengthening Rural Communities program is basically our overarching program that we use for our community development staff. It's inclusive, excuse me, just 1 second, I had a slide disappear on me. And I can't find it. Okay, here we go. So yeah, our Strengthening Our Rural Communities program is, who we work with is eligible organizations or those who are currently engaged in housing and or community development in rural areas or actively working to build this capacity, such as a community development corporation, community housing development organization, CHODO, local county governments, Native nations, and nonprofits involved in affordable housing activities. Unfortunately, statewide entities are not eligible to apply. So we're looking for, local and regional nonprofits, as well as tribal governments. Let's see, the Housing Institute. I'm sorry, I'm just a little disorganized here this morning. So in many rural communities, there's a significant gap between the supply of affordable housing and the number of people who need it. MHP's Housing Institute closes the gap through customized curriculum, guided collaboration, and capacity building for diverse community stakeholders. MHP established the program in 2010. And the Housing Institute brings together housing leaders and stakeholders to share their experiences, their best practices, and develop creative solutions to bring affordable housing to their communities. In its first 6 years, MHP convened 18 teams throughout Minnesota, providing in-person training and ongoing technical assistance that have helped communities secure millions in funding, build or preserve dozens of housing units, and fundamentally shift how they approach community development. The Institute model is an 18-month model that has shown that engaging different stakeholders, from government agencies to private businesses to nonprofit stakeholders, in truly effective and meaningful partnerships is the key ingredient to completing short-term projects and sustaining long-term relationships that lead to vibrant rural communities and regions. And our model, at its foundation, the Housing Institute is about relationship building. It's rooted in the belief by creating partnerships and working in collaboration, our rural areas are able to increase their housing production, preserve existing units of affordable housing, achieve economies of scale while retaining local control, learn from others' experiences and knowledge, and combine resources to take on new projects or new programming. As I said, this is the number one approach is a team-based approach. Moving beyond the individual leadership, the Institute relies on the team model that capitalizes on local experience and resources. We also work on specific projects with our teams. So during the application process, we ask those teams to consider possible projects or programs to pursue that would meet the needs or address the housing challenges in their communities. We also have a shared knowledge component. MHP customizes the curriculum for each institute's overarching topics addressing the majority of institutes include project financing, data acquisition, communication strategies, policy updates, community engagement, and more. And a final benefit of that too is we also create the connections. It creates the connections through relationships, in addition to the team building that we do. connects those community leaders to funders and developers who can make their projects a reality. Another component, of the Strengthen the Rural Communities program is our Native Community Development Institute. And that is very similar in structure to the Housing Institute, but the Native Community Development Institute, or NCDI, strengthens the capacity of the Native communities to reach their community development goals through collaborative self-styled trainings and peer-to-peer workshops and customized technical assistance. With the guidance of MHP, participating Native communities build teams that convene leaders from across sectors to identify and tackle a project that addresses a pressing need in their communities. And over the 18 months, similar to the Housing Institute, these teams participate in facilitated trainings and meet regularly to create a project plan and receive individualized guidance from MHP staff members throughout the process. So past projects for our Native Community Development Institute included building a supportive housing complex, creating a center for workforce development, and updating land use plans. Our model, the Native Community Developments, again, is rooted on the Housing Institute model, in the belief that by creating the partnerships and working collaboratively, our tribal communities are able to identify those critical community needs and envision a specific project to meet that need. Also working across a range of areas like housing, job creation, infrastructure, and economic development. Tribal nations are kind of unique, and in working with tribal governments and as well as tribal departments can be a little tricky sometimes, require some patience, but also a lot of understanding and well as ability to listen. There's a lot of technical experience engulfed in tribal nations. So I think asking the right questions and finding the right point of context is very crucial. MHP also leverages its own experience in in-house and community development to build local capacity and leadership. And we like to connect with the other tribes, organizations, and funders to turn a community vision into reality. And finally, on our institute model, we have our Emerging Developer Institute, and it's very similar to what's offered at GMHF. I guess the biggest difference is that we work a little further upstream. We want to be at the front end of developing or creating a developer pipeline. And we did our first Emerging Developer Initiative for Northern Minnesota with a concentration and focus on the Northwest region. MHP's Emerging Developer Initiative was created to support the emergence and professional development of new housing developers from rural communities and Native nations, again, in the Northwest. And at the time that we started this was the only program of its kind in the Northwest region. The EDI is dedicated to the success of those entrepreneurs in the housing development industry through education, mentorship, and peer-to-peer learning. As I said earlier too, the EDI has a focus on participation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color who will comprise at least half of our emerging developer cohorts going forward. And who we look for, we're looking for people who are excited to learn how to develop housing in their communities. So we do, like I said, we do work with a cohort. So once those who are chosen to participate in the cohort, we receive support in creating a project concept proposals. We also offer a stipend to our participants. We offer support from a team of mentors and trainers. We incorporated real estate training from one of the faculty at St. Thomas University, which was really an excellent program. And again, a lot of this focuses on the front end development, creating the base knowledge for those developers. So there are some similar programs that are available in the metro area. However, MHP Emerging Developer Initiative was the first, I believe, to come out state and be in the Northwest. Next slide, please. Okay, so we had do it. This is our contact information. We have our website on there. We also have a Twitter handle as well as Facebook. My name is Donald Gagala. I am part of the community development team. And my email is on the slide as well for contact. So, and Warren, I can turn that back over to you.
Thanks, Donald. We are now going to break out into small groups, and you have a list on the screen there of different topics that you could choose to meet about. And we have some Zoom instructions, which you may or may not be familiar with. At the bottom of your screen, of your Zoom screen, and I'm looking for mine. Okay, at the bottom tray there, where all the little chat icons are, there's a new one called breakout rooms that looks like a little bit like a tic-tac-toe or kind of a four square icon. If you click on that, what you will see is that same list that's on the screen, but now it's in sort of a chat box. And you can click on any one of those join buttons and you will be transported into that room with other people. And I can see some people are already going to the multifamily room, but we would encourage you to pick one of them. And then we will have a second breakout session. So pick one that you think is important to your community or that you're personally interested in. And then we'll reconvene here in about 20-25 minutes, and you'll be able to go into another room as a second choice. So I see a lot of developer attraction people joining us or joining that group, a lot of multifamily and single family. We got a few people going to the emerging developers in counting and housing and health equity. So keep looking at what you would like to discuss and then join that group. And we will be back here in about 25 minutes. And you will be automatically brought back into this room. So you'll get a notice that says you got about 1 minute left to wrap up your discussions in your small groups. And then we'll be together again as a group to rejoin another group. And we'll give you instructions at that point as well. So we still have about 36 of us here in the main forum that you're encouraged to go to one of these small groups. And by the way, if you go to either the multifamily housing or the single family housing group, you will be meeting with Minnesota Housing Finance Agency staff and be able to talk more about the upcoming RFP and the new programs and other programs that are available at Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. So multifamily housing and single family housing groups are being staffed by the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency folks. And if you are going to stick around here in this main forum space, you're welcome to do so. We won't be conducting any kind of session here, but you're welcome to wait until the others come back in the main forum space here. If you are still wanting to join a group, I know a couple of people, Dwayne and Mary, want to join the developer attraction group. At the bottom of your screen is some icons. One says breakout rooms. If you click on that, you will see the menu, and then just click on join for the developer attraction discussion. And Jeremiah can put you in that room too.
Okay, it looks like breakout rooms are back. We're going to continue with the second round of breakout sessions. Warren, anything you want to say?
Yeah, just encouraging everybody. Hope you had a good discussion. We still have pretty good attendance, and we're going to jump into the next breakout session. So you know the drill. Go to the bottom of your screen, pick another group or the same group if you want, uh, and join. You can see already we got a lot of people joining multifamily. That's a very popular discussion topic. But again, join either multifamily, single family, emerging developers, housing and health equity, or developer attraction. And we'll come back at 11:55, right around noon, and that'll be when we adjourn. But you do have another 20-25 minutes right now to get back into a small group, talk in some detail, or learn about programs in any of those 5 areas: multifamily, single family, emerging developer, health equity, and developer attraction. Looks like multifamily and single family are the big ones this time around. But take a look, join one of the groups. And you're welcome to stay in the large group here. We didn't do any kind of discussion during that break or that session, but you're also welcome to stay in this space. And if you need help, just speak up or send us a text and we'll put you in a room if you need help. If you just came back from one of the other rooms, you can join a breakout session. Well, that will be going, they're just getting going, another 20 minutes or so, they'll be in a breakout room. And you can join by going to the bottom of your screen and picking one of the breakout rooms. Okay, we're rejoining. Slowly but surely. As soon as everybody's back, we will wrap up and be done. Thanks, Alyssa. Okay, it's 12 noon. It's 12 noon and we're all back, or mostly all back here in the main space. I think we're just going to wrap up here and thank everybody for attending. Thank our sponsors. We had participation today from Minnesota Housing, co-sponsor, Department of Iron Range Resources and Rehabilitation, ACO in Duluth, Cook County HRA, Minnesota Housing Partnership, and Greater Minnesota Housing Fund. And thanks to all the staff who helped make this forum a success today. Some people have been asking or always ask, can you get a copy of the slides? Yes, we will post those later today, or at least within the next day or so. So go to our website and look for those. Also, there'll be a copy of the video. So if you want to share the video with somebody on your staff or in your community, feel free to share the video from today. And with that, thanks everybody for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye all. Have a good day.